Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Wadier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Wadier, and I'm here, as always, with my good friend and colleague, Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Doing fantastic, my friend. Good to see you. Excited for today's conversation. We're going to be going over a couple of research articles, and then ultimately, as always, something that you can take from today's conversation and put into your day-to-day life starting today to help adopt a fasting lifestyle. So welcome in to today's episode. If you are new, appreciate y'all joining us and giving us a shot, becoming part of your fasting and health/weight loss journey. If you want to learn more about our story, you can head back to episode 1, give it a listen, learn more about who we are, why we do what we do, and why we come to you each and every week. And we are on this mission to help unplug people and get them out of the dieting mindset, dieting culture, into a fasting, sustainable weight loss and health lifestyle. And it's been incredibly encouraging and rewarding just seeing the comments and the likes and the reviews. 5-star our favorite, of course. So if you feel so inclined, head on over, drop us one, subscribe, rate, review, unsubscribe, resubscribe, re-rate, re-review, whatever the terms are now, bookmark, save, share. We appreciate all of that as it tells the podcast world and the people that run these crazy podcast things that we are bringing value each and every week. And we appreciate you continuing to be on this journey with us. If you're a long-term listener, welcome in again to another episode. And today we're going to be talking about, Tommy, does restricting carbohydrate intake to earlier in the day improve glycemic control? So in this randomized controlled trial, restricting carbohydrate intake to breakfast and lunch compared to consuming carbs at each of the 3 main meals did not improve glycemic control in people with type 2 diabetes. And we went like screech, pump the brakes. Interesting, because I would have thought that it would. So we're going to dive into that. And you're thinking, well, I don't have diabetes. Great. There's going to be a lot of stuff in here from you as well, because we're going to talk about time-restricted eating and some other crossover studies that are linked to this one or this original paper. And I think there is some efficacy here. And we'll mention a few things that we think are big takeaways or things that you can do to put into your day-to-day fasting lifestyle, like we mentioned. So Tommy, as we dive into this conversation, that large kind of one-sentence overview conclusion seemed a little odd to us right off the bat, right?
Yeah, when we take a sweeping statement like we don't see any benefits to going beyond a standard, kind of diet, Mediterranean diet, and actually compartmentalizing ingestion of glucose, of carbohydrates, and particularly cutting them off from later in the day. It's a little surprising not to see additional benefit. But we start to look at, okay, well, what were they actually doing, and how was the study designed, and do we have the ability to make broad sweeping statements like that based on 23 subject participants? And they did go over 12 weeks, and so that was good. But at the same time, we're also looking for indications that there might be more. Like if we had several hundred people or several thousand people, would there be potentially other findings that might be a little bit more significant here? Because it's hard to separate those details out with such a small group. And so we found some interesting trends that we noticed, but also just the fact that they were eating to a caloric deficit. They were eating for a plan for losing 5% of their body weight over 12 weeks, and both with the same eating style, which was a Mediterranean diet that was 50% carbohydrate as well. So taking 50% carbohydrate and just doing it in a time-restricted manner, which would be breakfast or lunch only, or taking those same carbohydrates and just spanning them out as you normally would across the day, and you could be eating 4, 5, 6 times in a day potentially without any restriction there, is important to note, because when we say that there weren't significant differences between the groups, they may not have been doing as much as we would have liked to see, to kind of move the needles, right?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So the main takeaway, or the main summary, was restricting carb intake to breakfast and lunch compared to consuming carbs at each of the 3 main meals, right? So, and they're both using a Mediterranean diet. So when I first heard Mediterranean diet, I was like, oh yeah, I know that. But then when I saw the percentages, right, the macronutrient consumption of 50% carb, 30% fat, 20% protein, I was like, why are all of these studies done with 50% carb? And well, now I'm thinking, well, American Diabetes Association, food pyramid, standard American diet, 50 to 55% based on
keep it steady.
Right? Carbohydrates, right? So these people were on blood sugar managing medications as well, which I believe is part of why we saw the results spit out the results, why the results were the way they were as well. Because it's kind of like having the answers to the test, right? So I watched this as my dad progressed through the disease over the decades. Now he is no longer a diabetic. He's reversed it following fasting protocols and making more intentional food choices, still living his life, and 74 years old, rocking and rolling now. Used to be on 120 units of insulin, but his A1C and his fasting blood sugars and his daily blood sugars, like over the course of the day, when he was doing the finger pricks or using the CGMs, the continuous glucose monitors, were always elevated. So he was just literally managing it and not reversing it or getting to the root cause. And so when we look at this,
keeping it within the goalpost, right?
Yeah, keeping it within the goalpost, right? And even then it was going up year after year after year, which meant more meds, following a dietary pattern much like this. So at first I was like, ooh, Mediterranean diet. That's going to be cool because we know there's cardiometabolic benefit to the Mediterranean diet. Very well studied, decrease your risk of cardiovascular issues and metabolic syndrome. So I was like, all right, this will be cool. And what we looked at was the primary outcome was to see a change in A1C, this HbA1c metric, right? Which is much more common nowadays. And the secondary outcomes were anthropomorphic, so measurements, et cetera, fatty liver index, glucose tolerance, glycemic variability, so average glucose, time spent above what they call above range, right? Fasting glucose, insulin, free fatty acids, glucuronide peptide, beta cell function, liver enzymes, blood pressure, heart rate, and blood lipids. So there's a lot of moving parts in here in a very small study size, right? So 23 participants. So I want to talk about some crossover studies here in just a minute. But the frequency of meals, right? So 5% body weight, like you mentioned, 50, 30, 20, carb, fat, protein, which is, we do not endorse that for a weight loss protocol or a fasting protocol or a diabetes reversal protocol, right?
Right.
But that's what the study was. So when we're looking at this, one of the interesting things was that the evening meal percentage of carbohydrates, right? So 8% of carbs in the time-restricted carbohydrate group, the ETRC group, and 28%, which is actually lower than I was expecting, right? When you're looking at 50, 30, 20. 28% carbs at night. Now, for me, and we know this, that your body has a greater insulin response to carbohydrates if you're insulin resistant or have blood sugar related issues in the evening versus the same meal in the morning. So same meal at 8 p.m. versus 8 a.m., you're going to get a greater insulin response. So I know anecdotally for me, I don't
worse,
like...
Right? Which means worse insulin response, right?
Worse insulin response, yes.
Yeah.
I don't like eating carbohydrates later in the day because I don't sleep as well. So I'm doing it from a perspective of protecting my sleep rather than just, hey, what's my insulin doing?
It's a great point because your sleep quality and quantity tonight, how well you slept, is going to affect how you feel tomorrow, 100%. It's also going to affect discipline, cravings, all of these kind of factors, which then are going to make your fasting easier or harder the next day too. So that's where we really connect one day to the next. And so your decisions today really do affect your results tomorrow. And so when we look at this study, that's why I really like the idea and practice early time restricted carbohydrates. I prefer, if I'm going to have something that's heavier on the carbohydrate side, I will definitely have it earlier in the day. I don't typically do that, but I will feel much better if I'm going to, like, a brunch versus a late lunch or a dinner. I'm going to be much more likely to go, yeah, okay, I'll have enough time to feel better and to sleep well tonight if I have those carbohydrates earlier in the day.
The whole idea or the big picture behind this was the ETRC concept, because you said you liked the concept, and so did I. That's why I was like, ooh, let's check out this article, right? Mm-hmm. It's to align the carb consumption with the body's circadian rhythms. And the circadian, so my cortisol cycle, my circadian rhythms were way out of whack: stress, sleep, insulin proliferation, insulin resistance, etc. So the circadian rhythms are really important. The sleep cycle are the periodic patterns in physiology, metabolism, behavior that repeat themselves cyclically, like every 24 hours, right? So all the metabolic processes we have follow a rhythm across the day. So there are ebbs and flows, where they're up regulated or down regulated. And some of the evidence suggests that glucose metabolism peaks in the morning. We were just mentioning the 8 a.m. versus 8 p.m. meal, right? So several studies have reported that the blood glucose levels are lower following the consumption of carbs in the morning compared to the late afternoon or evening, which is a byproduct of those circadian rhythms. So a strength of this study was that where you were like, oh yeah, that sounds great. And I was like, oh yeah, that's interesting in theory, because we would expect to see that change due to what we already know about that circadian rhythm or that metabolism of carbohydrates or just blood sugar in general earlier versus later in the day.
Yeah, exactly. And we can see it in the results of this study too, because in the early time restricted carbohydrate group, you can see the blood sugar spikes. You can see the two spikes because they were only allowed to have those carbohydrate including foods earlier in the day, so for breakfast or for lunch. So you can see the two spikes, and then you can see a good amount of time where blood sugar was able to come back down, because you had from basically after that lunch spike, which peaked around, like, somewhere around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, let's say, and then it had plenty of time to continue to come back down before maybe around 7 or 8 a.m. the next morning, when the next blood sugar spike would come in from food. Okay, and so that was great to see. And then, but on the Mediterranean, on the control group, they had 3 spikes. You can see all 3 of them. There wasn't quite enough time to come back down from lunch before we spiked it again at dinner, and then that didn't have nearly as much time to come down before entering the sleep cycles, before going to sleep, which means that now I'm trying to go to sleep with higher blood sugar levels, and that's a bad thing. That's causing feelings of restlessness. I'm not able to enter as deep a stage of sleep or stay there as long, which means my sleep quality has just gone down. I'm going to feel that the next day 100%. And then that might affect my food making decisions the next morning too, when I'm going to reach for some breakfast foods. If I'm feeling blood sugar volatility or I'm not feeling as well, I might reach for some more of those carbohydrates that I wouldn't typically eat. And then those are going to lead to more blood sugar volatility. So you can see the vicious cycle that kind of starts to be created here, and it's setting the stage was set from the previous day, and that also led to what I noticed in the table of results as well, was more time over the ideal range, over the 125 blood sugar mark, over the 145 blood sugar mark. So even though they concluded that they didn't have a statistical difference between the groups for certain outcome measures, or for most outcome measures, actually, you can see some hints, some trends that look like if we had a bigger group, perhaps more time or
longer study, right?
That there's definitely some trends towards higher blood sugar levels for longer in the Mediterranean group, in the group that's ingesting carbohydrates later on in the day, which I found very interesting, and of course it kind of makes intuitive sense, but it's nice to see that there's some clues left in the data here, even if the groups weren't statistically different.
Yeah. So 2 things I want to mention. One is that blood sugar spikes are normal. Mm-hmm. When you eat a meal, blood sugar spikes, totally normal. But in a diabetic state, or a prevention of diabetes, and then said other complications, right, that come along with it, we want to minimize those peaks and valleys and try to normalize and get it within keep it between the field goal post as much as possible to allow the body to process that energy, deplete the glycogen, become more metabolically flexible, and reverse the upstream, which is the insulin resistant component. So
Yeah. And we didn't get to see what that looked like from this study too. I would have loved to see what their insulin looked like beforehand and
Right.
afterwards, after the
Right.
12 weeks too, because we can just see the baseline data for that.
And it's interesting. The second thing I was going to mention was about that baseline data is that both of these groups, Mediterranean or ETRC group, right, which are both eating Mediterranean 50, 30, 20, was that they were they were within the air quotes normal range on a lab, right, which is from anywhere from as low as 5 up to 24. But they were already in the 11 and 12 group, or 12 and 13 group, excuse me.
Yeah.
So they were
definitely
right
elevated.
smack dab in the middle of having elevated insulin already. And we know that then your downstream effect, the blood sugar, may or may not be a representative of the upstream problem, which is insulin.
Sure.
So we know that anything above 7, because you'll get variations on what the normal range should be, I believe between 2 and 5, right? And that's after personal experience and we've done multiple episodes on this concept as well, is anything above 7, there's a clear line or correlation between being above that line of 7 on the fasting insulin scale and your chance of being or having diabetes, cardiometabolic issues, metabolic syndrome, etc.
Yeah.
So they're already in that group. And I was like, okay, well, then we may still not be seeing that downstream effect as a true representation of what's happening.
Yeah, and downstream is an interesting term because they were looking at a lot of blood sugar and blood work markers here, and so it was good to see, like, even looking at fatty liver index, which is a cool way to kind of group certain biomarkers together and go, okay, do I have signs of fatty liver? And they didn't see differences between the groups there, but it was good that they were looking for them in a few places in the blood work that we don't normally see. What I would have liked to see, though, is something like if we're looking at cardiometabolic health, I would have loved to see heart rate variability looked at, because they were doing things over a 12-week period here. So heart rate variability is absolutely correlated with blood sugar volatility. So if we can get more of a handle on blood sugar volatility, we can potentially make improvements in heart rate variability. So it would have been nice to see that too, if that changed over the 12 weeks.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things here that I want to lead into a conversation about time-restricted feeding or time-restricted eating, aka fasting, since this is the Fasting for Life podcast, is that two of the biggest... So there's 4 things. 2 things I'm going to mention that will transition us into that conversation. And when we're looking at the fasting lifestyle, 2 of the biggest mistakes that we see is not varying your fasting window. So yes, we have a resource called the 1 Meal a Day, the Fast Start Guide, how to put 1 meal a day fasting into your day-to-day life. That doesn't mean eating dinner every single day.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
Now that might work for a period of time, but that's probably not the long-term sustainable solution for weight loss management and health long-term for most people.
Definitely not the only fasting tool you're going to need.
Not the only tool you're going to use, right? Especially if you've got considerable weight to lose or if you've regained and lost the same weight over and over.
Yeah, if you were going to the hardware store and you just bought a screwdriver, you'd probably be able to do a lot, with it if it was your first tool. But eventually, you're going to need some other tools, right?
Yeah. I'm going to need a hammer at some point, especially if I have a nail, okay, not a screw, okay? We've never used that analogy before. Man, that's so terrible.
Right.
So terrible. Good work. The second thing is that the food choices or the intentionality of the food going into your nutrition opportunities or your nutrition windows, right? So with this study, there are 2 factors that lead into the fasting conversation. And one is that we're not certain that results like this are generalizable to a eukcaloric diet. In accordance with diets being designed to induce a weight loss, which this was, both groups had significant weight loss with no difference between the 2 groups. So it's possible that the metabolic benefits of simply that caloric restriction, aka fasting, are so potent that they are overwhelm the potential benefits of consuming the majority of carbs earlier in that day.
That's a good point, yeah.
Right? The second thing is the Mediterranean style diet, that's a mouthful, is I already mentioned this, is there's evidence suggests that simply that intervention, I'm still surprised by the carbohydrate intake, but it's non-processed, non-refined, it's organic grains, etc. But I was still surprised by the 50%, but they did that for the study. It can improve a variety of cardiometabolic risk factors, insulin sensitivity, even without weight loss. So in both groups, the diet was designed to be rich in whole grains, fruits, veggies, nuts, seeds, fish, eggs, poultry, olive oil, low in all the salt, sugar, fat, alcohol, right? So we know that's going to move the needle. So considering those two factors, it's possible that if the participants had consumed their normal dietary kind of lifestyle and that they only differed in the distribution of when the carbohydrate intake was, that the difference between the groups would have been observed. And that's what's supported in other studies, like a 5-week crossover study that had participants with prediabetes consume the same diet with one condition requiring, here we go, that all of the participants in the study group finished their meals by 3 p.m. and had a 6-hour eating window. That then showed improved insulin sensitivity, improved beta cell function, compared to the 12-hour eating window. And the meta-analysis of that controlled trials concluded that compared to a later time-restricted eating, and we've done an episode on this article specifically, typically an eating window of 12 to 8 versus an eating window that ended at 4 was much better at improving that insulin sensitivity, which is that upstream effect that we want.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it's essentially taking a part of what they were looking at in this study where they didn't find the differences between the group, but actually expanding it and pulling harder on that lever, which is controlling the actual time of it, regardless of the calories that are coming in. And like you mentioned, regardless of the eating style as well, because making a big improvement to just going like mostly whole foods based, like a Mediterranean diet is a pretty well-rounded
huge
diet.
Start.
Yeah, it's huge, and I mean it's one of my favorite styles of eating where you go like, well, what's just a simple way to just go, I want to eat in a certain fashion so I can know that I'm kind of checking that box consistently, but I don't want it to be overly restrictive. How can I do that? Mediterranean diet is a great way to do it. A paleo diet is another way
the whole 30 diet, right?
Yeah.
The whole food diet, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, these are just good kind of like well-rounded ways. So once you kind of make that leap right there, to just do something, quote unquote, just like restricting carbohydrates, a little bit of compartmentalization, you're not seeing as big of a difference. But when you pull the lever even harder and go, I'm done eating by 3 p.m. or I'm done eating by 4 p.m. and now you're having this big time window for blood sugar and insulin to normalize, and then for nothing else to be coming in, like additional calories to be coming in, sure, but additional blood sugar and insulin spikes, more importantly even, to be actually happening, which means, potentially the next day I wake up, insulin levels are lower, I'm not retaining water because of excess insulin levels, which means that all of a sudden I'm seeing that the scale didn't tick up today, or maybe it stayed the same as yesterday, or maybe it ticked down a little bit. Even if I wasn't trying to eat within a caloric deficit, all of a sudden I'm doing things, I'm processing through my food, my calories faster, which means that I had access to that energy, to those energy stores faster as well, rather than the sleepy, lethargic feelings of high insulin foods, especially later on in the evening, right?
Yeah, and so that speaks to the two things, right? So not just one meal a day is not just OMAD every night. So we've changed our tune on this over the years, is that eating earlier has a great benefit, right? We even just had a question that came in our coaching last week. It was like, should I eat later if it's part of the schedule, or should I eat early? The answer is always eat earlier.
Yeah, to get a couple extra burn hours, right? Like, but I really want to hit that 30-hour fast. Like, to have the earlier meal, that's going to be much better.
Yeah, absolutely. Prioritize protein, eat earlier. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a couple caveats to that. Whatever simplifies that and allows you to make a better decision about your nutrition opportunity, right? Which is why I love this whole food diet, this whole food approach, which is the second thing we talk a lot about, is making sure that, fasting just doesn't give you the the ability to just eat whatever you want as much as you want, right? There still has to be, we need to work on that food. If you got 50 pounds to lose, like I used to have, it wasn't all, insulin resistance and weight loss resistance. There were some food choices over the years that proliferated that problem,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So I had to work on that lifestyle component as well, which is what we teach and preach and hopefully encourage people to do. So, lots of other crossover studies that were referenced coming out of this one in regards to, increases or improvements in that insulin sensitivity, improvements in blood sugar response, improvements in time area under the curve, or what they call time out of range, right? Which is that consistency that we really want to look for. So if you've done the low carb, I'm going low carb, I'm never looking at bread again. Well, how about just take your carbohydrates, make them less refined, less processed, and move them earlier in the day. Some people out there can be like, well, if I'd like to encourage you that if you are diabetic, going low carb, prioritize protein, higher fat is going to be, we've done episodes on 90-day uses of therapeutic ketosis, right? We've looked at the studies on low carb for diabetics over the course of, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and 2 years. And by that 2-year mark, a lot of people have reverted back because of that lifestyle component.
Yeah, hard to maintain.
Yeah, so this might be the thing. Not going to give it up all at once and go cold turkey. Cold turkey doesn't work for a lot of people, right? Ever tried to quit smoking? Right? Ever try to quit something, right? Like cold turkey doesn't work for a lot of folks.
Sure.
Right? So let's find replacements. Let's find an intermediate where we can kind of wade into the water and be like, all right, this feels better. Now you're starting to work on that lifestyle component, that staying consistent with your fasting windows, moving that meal earlier in the day, not just doing your same OMAD day after day after day. Still getting to enjoy some of the foods you love and still beginning with the end in mind, knowing that if you do it earlier in the day, based on all of the other crossover studies here in the studies that we've done in the past, that you're going to get a better glucose response, which is going to allow you to stay more consistent, have less effect on sleep, have less cravings, balance out those hunger cues, etc. So it's just a really interesting article, Tommy. I love their come from. I love this whole idea of, ETRC, carbohydrates earlier in the day. But as we look at a takeaway for today, my mind just goes to the fasting, the blueprint to fasting for fat loss. Or if you're looking for more consistency, then that's a place we could start.
Yeah, it really is, because you're talking about which levers are going to help me move the needle. So if you can do things like make 1 or 2 better food choices today and going into tomorrow, that's great. But looking for those little ways where you can kind of push it. How do I push my fast a little bit longer while I'm making these good food choices? Because now I'm really stacking the deck in my favor. So that's where the blueprint can come in handy. So grab that so you can figure out which lever you're going to pull. Just a little bit more, because that's where new results lie. They lie a little bit outside of what you're currently doing and what feels comfortable, for you right now. So just getting a few reps outside of your comfort zone can go a long way. So I absolutely love that.
Yeah, and fasting is the cheat code, right? So that's why we created the blueprint to fasting for fat loss. I mean, it gives you the what, the who, what, when, where, and why, right? So I've read it. I've gone back. We're going to be putting out another version. Like we keep leveling it up and improving it. But there are fasting schedules in there that will allow you to see kind of, all right, this is where I'm at. This is where I kind of want to get to. And there's all those little steps in between. But the best thing you can do is take 1 or 2 things away from today's conversation, or 1 or 2 things away from that blueprint. You can grab it. It's in the show notes. We'll zoom it over into your inbox and it's yours. 1 or 2 of those little things will add up with consistency long term, and that's ultimately what we want for you. So, Tommy, as we wrap up today's conversation, interesting segue into what it is that we do, right? Looking at this study and then taking it and applying it to a fasting lifestyle. So we appreciate you guys listening in. Tommy, as always, I appreciate the conversation, and we'll talk soon.
Cool. Thank you. Bye. So, you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.